My desire is to empower the family to take care of their loved one, to teach them how to do this so that then they're an advocate for future home funerals, to let other people know that it's possible. My motivation is that as the person is dying, as the body's energy is decreasing, the spiritual energy is expanding. And so whatever their beliefs are, if we know what spiritual practices can support that holding of that spiritual energy while fear is arising or pain is arising in the physical body, then the death event can be a spiritual event instead of a physical event.
Welcome back to Unbroken Chain. I'm Mara James, and that is Caroline Yongue. I met Caroline earlier this summer in Asheville, and I became aware of her because I saw a notice for a class that she was teaching on home funerals. And when I saw that, I immediately thought, I need to find out more about this woman. She indeed is an amazing educator. She's the director of two really powerful projects. One is the Carolina Memorial Sanctuary, which is a conservation burial ground, which is also known as a green burial ground. It's one of 9 in the country, and it is a response to the toxic way that the funeral industry has completely privatized death in this country. And her other project is the Center for End-of-Life Transitions, where she's helping people talk about, think about, hold death in ways that are healthy and help us approach the end of our life with preparation in many ways. Caroline has taken monastic vows in the Soto Zen tradition of Buddhism. She said she's not in a monastery, she's out in the world with people, but she lives in a really simple, beautiful apartment on the property where her zendo is. She doesn't have a shaved head at the moment, which she said is because she's working so intimately with those at the end of their life, oftentimes cancer patients, that she found that it was confusing to people for her to have a shaved head in that situation. So she dresses, in normal everyday clothes, but oh my goodness, she has such a grounded, strong presence with her, and she goes really deep. She said she doesn't do small talk because her every interaction is meaningful. She's very present, and I felt that in our conversation. I love the way that she talks about holding space and the Buddhist practices that help her do that specifically. I think that's something that we know how to do intuitively when we're kids, just like we know how to be with the elderly and with the dying. And it's something that we're socialized out of because we learn to fear our vulnerability and ultimately our death. And Caroline has such compassion for the human condition that she really invites us in to do this work that seems scary at the outset, but ultimately sets us free to be so alive in the world in every moment. She told a story before we started recording about a guy that she was helping do a home funeral for his wife who had died, and he was actually burying her in the backyard. And a cop showed up because he got wind of what was going on and thought he was going to go make some arrests. He busted onto the property, and Caroline was able to intercept him and educate him about what a home funeral is and that it's perfectly legal in the part of North Carolina where they were. And she said the cop, after this conversation, ended up leaving in tears because he was so moved by what he found there and the grace with which these people were grieving this loss. So I just invite anyone who wants to deepen their ability to be present with one another, to be present with what is and not what's comfortable or easy. This is a really special conversation. I'll let Caroline do the rest. I'll see you on the other side.
I'm Caroline Yongue, and I am the director of a conservation burial ground, Carolina Memorial Sanctuary, and I'm also the director of a project, Center for End-of-Life Transitions. We help people negotiate death care and help people prepare for death.
What does that mean, prepare for death?
Well, it means several things, but that project, Center for End-of-Life Transitions, first got started as a way to help people to prepare for the death of their physical body and to make plans for the disposition of that physical body, and also to make plans for the dying process, what the wishes are. That was based on a request from my Buddhist teacher for me to learn how to take care of a deceased body so that that body could lay in state for 3 days to allow for a spiritual transition that occurs after the last breath, so that the body is protected from disturbance. So in learning that process and helping people in my community to take care of their own loved ones after death, I discovered that people were unprepared for the death event and were unprepared for making choices about life support. And then most folks had not even thought about what to do with the body after death. So after learning the practices, we developed classes to help people to be in a group format, so they could actually complete their advanced care directives. And we added in after death care directives, the directives about what to do with the body. And then even after doing all that, folks were unprepared for death, spiritually, emotionally. And so we created another class, a year-long class, to provide a format for people to really look at their own death and to hold it for a year in a group setting. And we meet once a month for 3 hours each month. And so I will say that in the beginning of the year, a lot of people are fearful about their death, but at the end of the year, they're fearless because they've looked at it. They've held it and looked at it. And when you look at something that long, the fear goes away because you have an understanding that you can see where you've made up stories and then believe them. And we've held space for people to talk about all that. And then they dissolve.
It's like magic.
The stories dissolve.
Yeah. In the West, we live in a pretty death-denying culture. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about sort of the roots of the fear that you've seen in people, or the stories that are the most pervasive.
I think that for our current time, our experience is, except for the very old generations, like my dad's now 96, and that generation would have seen death in the home. The loved ones would have died at home typically, and the family, when my dad was a child and my mother was a child, their parents would have participated in a community event at death. So, for instance, my mother's father was a doctor, a little small-town doctor, and so at death, my grandfather would have gone to declare death, and my grandmother would have gone with him, and she would have helped the women bathe and dress the body to lay in state in the home. And then the men would have likely dug the grave and perhaps made a casket, and it was a community event. And over time, we've handed off those practices to professionals. And we've come to believe, it's one of those things where we've made up this story, that it's illegal for us to continue to take care of our own dead. And it's legal in most states. But we've bought into the belief that we have to hand that over. And so it's been taken out of our lives. And in it not being seen and held, we make up stories about it. We see movies that shows that the body right after death decomposes very quickly, and that's not true. So we've just made up these stories about what death means. So we've developed a fear because nobody talks about it, because nobody sees it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not something, particularly in the United States, that people talk about and see. I think we're unique in the United States in how death-denying that we are.
And then I would imagine that the funeral industry has pretty powerful capitalistic motivation to keep perpetuating that.
Absolutely. They do. There's actually, in the United States, there's more funeral homes in the country than there's the population to support the funeral homes.
Really?
That's right. And so, and a lot of the funeral homes have been bought up by big conglomerates, and so there's very few local, family-owned or private funeral homes. And some funeral homes are also uneducated about our legal rights. They don't understand that in North Carolina, where I am, there's statutes that say the family has a legal right to act as funeral director. But a lot of funeral homes don't know that. And during their training, they've been trained to believe that a body needs to be cared for in a certain way with embalming and other things to protect the public from distress or trauma. The belief is that if we see an unembalmed body, we will be traumatically affected. And it's not the case. In fact, an unembalmed body looks, for the most part, more natural unless there's been a traumatic death or something like that. So, what we offer with the Center for End-of-Life Transitions isn't for everybody. It's best if you've prepared to do a home funeral, but the goal of that project is to let people know that they have options.
Yeah, what are our rights?
So in North Carolina, when death happens, so I'll use a scenario of someone is in hospice care and it's an unexpected death and they die at home. Instead of calling the funeral home right away, there's this event that happens after what we in Buddhism call the last gross breath, where death is declared. There is a gathering of energy into the heart space, and at that time, there's an awakened experience for the person who has died. And if the family and the caregivers allow that space to happen, and they're there in that space, they experience this grace or pause that is very serene, and it's a gift to everybody to just stop, because for the most part, the family and loved ones there's a level of anxiety and stress waiting for that last breath. And so when that has occurred, it's okay to do nothing for a bit. And so a lot of times the family and caregivers are in this space of not knowing now what to do because they haven't projected ahead about what's next. So after allowing that first hour, then the body could be straightened out and tidied up, and then the loved ones could bathe and dress the body. They might gather the clothing for the person to be dressed in. They could remove the equipment that kept the person alive out of the room and start to create a sacred space for this person and for themselves when they're visiting them. And the suggestion is to do it very quietly, that the hearing might be lingering, and it is magnified thousandfold. So to begin to whisper, to be quiet, to do things in a mindful way. There's no need to hurry now because death has happened. So with that mindful presence of creating now a sacred space for your loved one, there's this heart-open experience that I don't know how to describe it. It's very lovely. And so the person, dry ice would be used to keep the body cool, and it's placed in certain areas under the body to keep it cool but not to freeze it. And rigor mortis will happen after a few hours, and then it'll last for a few hours, and then it goes away. So the body has a legal right to do that, and we call that a home funeral. And sometimes people will keep their loved one in the home for up to 3 days. And in North Carolina, they also have the legal right to transport their loved one in their own vehicle. So at our burial ground, we have helped families to provide home funerals in their own home. They drive them in their own car to the burial ground, and then they help to bury them themselves. So they're participating in the whole event. which helps with the grief process. In North Carolina, it's legal to bury on your own land. There are county regulations about how far from a water source you need to be. There are city regulations, like in Asheville, you cannot bury within the Asheville city limits, but out in the counties you can. And that distance from water varies from county to county. And then one can obtain a blank death certificate. Now, this is still, I'm talking about hospice care where death was expected. And then they can handwrite in the information on the death certificate and take it to the hospice physician to be signed, and then take it to the registrar's office to be recorded. So the family has taken care of all aspects of the death event, and the funeral home was not used. So there are also times when a funeral home might be used for certain things, like maybe perhaps transportation. It's knowing what the options are and how the loved ones want to proceed, and if there's even the energy to do that.
How has this changed the grieving process for the family and what you've seen?
So typically when death happens, a well-meaning individual will come into the room and ask the question, who do you want us to call? Meaning a funeral home. And death has just happened. It hasn't really even sunk in yet that death has happened. So within a few hours, the body's whisked away. To where? And typically they've not even visited the funeral home. They don't know where. It's going to go into refrigeration in a big refrigerator. And it's a strange place. They're strangers. And so when their loved one can stay in the home, I mean, you can imagine there's usually, if in hospice care, the caregivers are usually pretty tired. There's probably people from out of town. And so instead of having now to go to a funeral home to make all these arrangements, there's time to take a shower, to go get a cup of coffee, to come back and sit with your loved one, to be in the room with them, to tell them how you feel, to express your gratitude, your sadness, and at any time of day or night. You don't have to wait for visiting hours when you have an hour and you've got a lot of people there to see you, and you don't really have time to be with your deceased loved one because there's a gathering there, and it's in an unfamiliar place. So when our loved ones can stay in our own home, grief is going to arise in cycles, and there's going to be joy right along with it. I helped with a home funeral for a young girl. She was 10 when she died. Her family knew she wasn't going to live very long, and she had 2 siblings that were young, and they were able to go in and lay in the bed with her. It was normal to them because it was in their own home. It was her bed. The only difference was her body was cool, but they weren't frightened because it was their own home. Her parents said they could go in any time of day or night, lay in the bed with her, get used to the idea that she had died. So by the end of the 3 days, they were ready. They were ready. They knew she was no longer in that body. But during the 3 days, something of this little girl left. Something else left. And they could witness that. So at the end of the 3 days, I went over and we carried her in their van. She was held by her mother in her lap, and she was taken to be cremated. So it's such a sad event, but because they kept taking care of her, their grief was transformed. I mean, they were certainly still sad. There certainly was grief, but there wasn't a severing of the connection with her, that where they had to hand her over to a stranger. So,
yeah, that's pretty radical.
It's helpful. Yeah.
What does your role tend to be in these situations? Do people bring you in as an advocate?
It varies. There are some people who will simply make a phone call to ask how to do a home funeral, and I'll tell them, give them permission, letting them know it's their legal right, and then they go and do it themselves. Other people need help or want help with the entire thing, particularly if it's a death that has happened that is traumatic, like a sudden death and their loved ones in the hospital. And then I'll go to see if the physical body is in a condition where it can come home. And I could coordinate with the funeral home for picking up this person and taking them home or whatever the decisions are made. It's rare, though, when people will connect with our volunteers at Center for End-of-Life Transitions and plan ahead for a home funeral. It's pretty rare. So in that case, we will have visited the home and the family members and perhaps the person who's dying to find out what their wishes are. And we'll come up with a plan about, usually that's hospice care when this is happening. We'll come up with a plan about where the person's going to lay and stay, whether it's going to be in a community room or in their bedroom. We have a massage table that we bring with us, and we bring supplies for bathing and dressing the body. So in that case, my desire is to empower the family to take care of their loved one, to teach them how to do this so that then they're an advocate for future home funerals, to let other people know that it's possible. And it is one of our goals to educate people about their options around death care. And again, I'll say again, it's not for everybody. And then there are times that they might want us to do all of it. And then we would come back twice a day for 3 days to change the dry ice and make sure the body's cooperating with the home funeral and things like that. We don't charge for that service. This is a service project of the home funerals is a service project of our of Center for End-of-Life Transition. So we have volunteers who want to help do that.
Wow. Is that born out of your spiritual practice with Buddhism?
The volunteering?
Yeah.
I don't know, not necessarily. I think it is, well, that's a good question. Throughout my time doing these projects, because not many people are doing it, I've been accused of doing something illegal. So one of the reasons that we do home funerals and don't charge is that I don't want to be accused of acting as a funeral director. You know, ideally, I would tell the family, this is the ideal, is that, you know, I would go in and I would direct the family and loved ones to do everything. I'm really not touching this person. I'm telling them how to do it and providing the space for it. And that's the ideal. So when I started teaching classes on helping people complete their advanced care directives by providing information, the North Carolina State Board, I was accused of practicing law without a license. So that was dismissed. And then when I started the cemetery, the Green Cemetery, I was accused of doing something illegal. And in North Carolina, the way we could do that is because it's church-owned. It's owned by our Buddhist group. It's an all-faiths church. But I did receive a letter from the North Carolina Cemetery Commission suggesting that I was doing something illegal, and that got cleared up. So
people are so threatened by people taking the power back.
I know. So as a result of all that, I don't go broadcast everything that I'm doing. It's just a quiet service that we kind of slide around and help people do these things. And I haven't put it out there in people's faces. But now, with the home funeral movement, there's a National Home Funeral Alliance, so there are a lot of people out there doing home funerals. So this was, you know, we were doing it a long time ago, and we've been doing it for over 20 years, so weren't many people doing it.
I've heard you speak also about death midwifery or death doula training. Is that part of this?
So for me, the home funeral guide or a death care midwife is a person who would take care of after the death event, when they're actually taking care of the body. Okay, like a birth midwife. Okay, a doula to me is someone who helps prepare and walks through the event with them, like a birth doula would do. And so, as a doula, I would interview an individual and their family about their beliefs, how they want to be supported spiritually, because my motivation is that as the person is dying, as the body's energy is decreasing, the spiritual energy is expanding. And so whatever their beliefs are, if we know what their beliefs are, if we know what spiritual practices can support that holding of that spiritual energy while fear is arising or pain is arising in the physical body, then the death event can be a spiritual event. instead of a physical event, or a combination of both. So as for me as a doula, I would want to know what those spiritual practices are and how to support that from whatever faith tradition they have. If it's not my belief, then we could find somebody to help them. And then to provide that kind of environment that can hold all of that, and provide for the caregivers some practices. Some of these are Buddhist practices, but they're for anybody, to use for themselves and for their loved one who's dying when fear might arise or when the body's in pain. And to know if they're caught off by something that is happening, the individuals who's dying, is there something that can be read to them? Is there music they can listen to that brings them back to their spiritual essence if they get distracted by news of something or fear and things like that? And then the interview would also include, if they wanted a home funeral, what is the disposition of the body? Do they have a sense of how they want that to be? Is there a ceremony they would like? It would encompass all of that. And it may also include the care of the body. Okay.
Would you be willing to share some of the practices that you use personally to hold space?
Yes. So tong-len is Tonglen, is a Tibetan Buddhist practice, but it is for anybody. And tong-len means taking and sending. So for myself, when I pick up the telephone and it's a call for Center for End of Life Transitions or the sanctuary, there's a little flutter of, oh no, that comes in my heart and in my head, projecting that this might be what I would call a death call. Because I'm going about my life, and then I'll get a call, because we're on call all the time. So anyway, I will do this quick breath because this is I've done it for so long, it's kind of an automatic for me. So what it means is that when there's a sense of a disturbance in the mind or the emotions or physically that catches us and we find ourselves gripping on it, if you breathe space around that without trying to let go of it, and then breathe out ease, one can soften the experience. We're still allowing it, we're not trying to push it away. And by looking at it and holding it that way, it has less grip on us. So the technique is to breathe space around it. So I'll breathe space around my mind, trying to project ahead about, oh no, this is going to be blah, 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 and just be present to the phone call. I will breathe space into my heart, space that is fluttering from maybe perhaps fear or anxiety, whatever it is. I'm not really even trying to label it. I'm just recognizing there's a sensation. So I'll breathe space into my heart space and expand that breath there, and then breathe out ease without trying to identify or label what it is. So that way there's an acknowledgement that something's disturbed and an ease that comes right after it. And it can feel kind of mechanical when you're first learning to do it, but over time it becomes a lot easier. So when I'm going to go to someone's house to help with a home funeral, as I'm driving, I'm doing this breath for myself. I'm releasing all the thoughts that are coming through, trying to project ahead, and just paying attention and clearing my space so that my mental activity is slowed down and I'm connecting more with my heart and attempting to arrive without a preconceived idea of what I'm going to find, because they're all different. So as I'm getting out of the car, I'm going to leave Caroline in the car. And Caroline and her ego and everything else is going to stay there. And then I'll go in open because there's no room for Caroline to go in there. And in that way, there's an expansion that can happen so that when I step into the door, everything that is there in this space is for me to see. I can expand to see the room, the people who are in there, the pets who are in there, the energy that is there. I don't go in with the idea that we're going to walk right in and go see their loved one and get to work, because it might be that it's 3 hours later before I even see their loved one. So what to do will arise if I can go in open. And when I do go in that way, my heart is open. So I'm meeting people with an open heart. And because my heart is open, their heart starts to open. It might take a time for some people. Some people it's easy because their loved ones just died. And they're in this place of not knowing what to do. And it's my experience that then when I meet these people again on another occasion, we meet again with the same open heart that we had when we saw each other last. Our heart's open to that level again, because that's our connection. And it's quite beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. So if you're bringing Caroline with the ego and the needs into the space, you're filtering what you're observing through your own personal karma or experience, or I guess I'm trying to understand.
So if I were to go in as Caroline with my full-fledged ego and all that going on?
What's between you and the experience?
Okay, so let's play that out. So if I go in as Caroline, well, I like to make lists. I like to get things done, and chop, let's get things done because I've got a lot to do. So I might walk in and I'll go, okay, let me see this person, and I'm not even paying attention to the people who are there. I'm focused on a task that needs to be done. I'll want to get in, bring all my tools. I don't even carry my kit in with me when I go the first time. Might not need it. They've got everything on hand. We could just use what they have. And, this is what I've learned over time. When I first started doing it, I was very nervous, always questioning, how do I think I should be able to do this? Who do you think you are? And I just carry it in with me, and I'd learn to go, okay, I don't have time to listen to you right now. I'll listen to you later, but right now we got to do this. So I'm just talking to myself. I mean, there are instances when it's a traumatic death, and I have to go into the morgue and see somebody. I'm frightened, but I don't let it stop me. I acknowledge it, I breathe in that fear, I breathe space around it, and I step forward. What's the worst that can happen? Worst that can happen is I die. I'm not going to die from this. So I'm not even afraid of that anymore. So it's the worst that can happen. So I just step forward. So you could see if someone is not able to check their ego at the door, it's not a pure open heart experience for people to allow whatever arises to arise. I'd want to control it all. I'd be on my own timetable. And that's not what this is about. It's not what life is about, really. So in being able to do that practice for home funerals, I can bring that into my life. I don't need to project what the next minute's going to be or the next hour's going to be, because I don't know. You just see where it is.
That sounds like pretty profound trust that you have everything you need to meet the moment that's going to arise. I think that's where I catch myself sometimes, is like this feeling of like preparation or needing to get ready for something instead of trusting that I'll be there when I'm there.
It just takes practice sitting with that and doing that breath, doing that tong-len breath. When one feels themselves revving up, they've lost this moment. And they've bought into the belief that you've got to prepare. We're pretty amazing beings in that we can step in and we can handle the next moment. But the thing is, we miss this moment. So if we're always out there looking and preparing, we've lost this moment. I mean, just like you interviewing me, you have to listen to what I'm saying, and you might be projecting ahead about what's the next question going to be. Instead of trusting, if there's a pause, the next question will arise.
Totally.
We get uncomfortable with that pause. We think we have to fill it up. We don't have to fill it up. There's beauty in that pause. Great beauty in that pause.
Well, you said a moment ago that's not what life is about. So what is it about?
Oh, that's interesting. Somebody asked me to write an article about what is the meaning of life, and I've never written it. So I think it's being present to what unfolds. So here we're in this room. There's woods. There's these big windows, and it's beautiful. We're in the trees. I walk into this room. I don't even see that because it's here all the time. But because I also work right in this room, I eat in this room, and I don't even see it. But if I were present all the time, all of it would be here. Mm-hmm. I narrow down to a fingernail, and then I expand back out to this entire room. So I think that's life, to be able to expand out and take it all in, and then narrow down to what needs to be done. We forget to expand out. Me and my own little body and mind, I forget to include you in it. You're part of it. Jasper, the dog on the floor, is part of it. We're all part of it. So we can expand out to include all of this, but we forget we can do that. Mm-hmm. When we're driving in our own little box and the person next to me is an enemy. Why? Why are they an enemy? Because they're driving a certain way. I wouldn't be that way if we were standing next to each other. Isn't that weird how we do that? Uh-huh. Yeah. To expand out in my car, to other people on the road. It's just interesting. They're different from me, so I make up a story. Mm-hmm.
Do you think being present to death in the way that you have in the last 20 years has changed your moment-to-moment
I do.
life?
Yeah, when I get in my car, I know that could be my death. Every time I'm in my car. I walk down the steep stairs here, and I'm always conscious of this could be it, But there's no fear in it. There's just an acknowledgement. It's almost like a checking of my mind. I don't want to die angry. Mm-hmm. I don't want to die frightened. I want to die with compassion and love. That's the last thing in my mind, and what will continue then, instead of some other emotion.
Mm-hmm. So how do you hold your own death?
Well, I'm prepared. I've prepared for it. So I've done all my directives. I have a burial ground. I'm going to get buried there. I don't care where in the burial ground I get buried. I've already gotten my do not resuscitate order. It's on my refrigerator. I've got one in my car. So now for me, it is my spiritual training to train myself to be aware of death, to know what death looks like when it comes, to know how the body, the elements dissolve, to recognize that, so that I can be present for my own death. Because it's likely I'll die alone. I live alone. So if there's a sudden death, I'll probably be by myself. And to know when I've died, it sounds weird, but for sudden death, sometimes people they don't know they've died. So I've set up the practices that I want to support me after death, and I have people who are assigned to do those for me, and who Jasper is going to go to and who Boysenberry is going to go to if I should die before they do. So I'm not afraid of death. The thing that comes to my mind is that I have these two projects that I've started that I don't want to cause a burden to anybody, because they're both projects of our Buddhist group, and so I'm working very hard to make sure that they can continue without being a burden. So even the Dalai Lama has said that he's training for death, because in Buddhism, the death event is the most ripe opportunity for enlightenment. And that if we can live our lives with death on our shoulders, that we can be happier and more present with people, because you too will die. And so if I can look at you knowing that you could leave here today and die, I'm going to be more compassionate. But we forget that. We forget that everybody we see is going to die at some point, and we don't know when. So the Dalai Lama has even he says he's kind of excited about death, so he can see if the practices he's done will work. So that kind of scares me, that if he's even concerned about his own ability to stay present at death, what chance do I have? But I go anyway. I try anyway.
Yeah. How did you come to Buddhism as the cosmology that feels most aligned to you in this sort of experiment of life?
So I was raised as a Presbyterian and with my family, and in the 70s, early 70s, I was in church with my parents, and somebody came into church with 3 African American people, and about 30 of the congregation got up and left, and I was appalled by that. And so I told my parents I wasn't going back. But I did admire that they had a spiritual practice that supported their marriage, supported their lives, and was for them. So after that, in my 20s, I started looking for something. So I dabbled in a lot of different things, and I was working at Nantahala Outdoor Center, and it's a pretty remote area. We didn't have any entertainment. And one of the founders of the Nantahala Outdoor Center became friends with 2 women who practiced Buddhism, and so they came to this area, and one of them would give Dharma talks. And the idea was that I was in control of my own happiness and my own suffering. And that was interesting to me, that I had control of that. So I started studying and asked my teacher to be my teacher and find that to be true. I am in charge of my own suffering and happiness. And yeah.
How would you respond to somebody who says, but bad stuff happens to you?
Stuff happens to me. So if one would label it as a bad thing that happens to me, it's in my capacity to understand that things happen. Transitions happen. It's a fact. Nothing's permanent. So in that understanding, I also understand that even an event that could be called bad will pass. It's not permanent. It might have an effect that doesn't go away. If someone has an injury that causes some damage to the body that's not going to be repaired, that is just what is. We have the capacity to either suffer with it and not accept it, or accept it, and I mean, it might not be great, but you can live with it, perhaps. And but that takes training. It takes training with the mind to fill in the groove of suffering, the habit of suffering, the habit of telling a story over and over and over again that is not helpful. It's just a story, but we create this groove where this story resides. And when an event happens, we fall into that groove and the same stories are told over and over again. So we create a new one, a new groove that is a little more optimistic, that is more understanding that this is just the nature of life. Nothing's going to be permanent. Everything's transitional. Everything is subject to change. So there's liberation in that, and knowing that. It keeps one from clinging to the way things are, because the next minute's going to be very different.
It's so wild that we're alive. Just hearing you talk about that, I'm so humbled by the idea that we're here and we're asked to love each other. We're asked to love children while also holding at the same time the fact that those children could die at any moment, that love could be. That's a really big job.
But if we practice doing that, the fear of the death would go away. There would be a more preciousness to the holding of anybody, the holding of you right now, sitting here, and, we're looking at each other. I mean, we're both going to die. And so, the time that you're here and alive and your heart is open, I feel your heart open. And there's a precious connection, but we forget that everybody's going to do it. That we can connect with everybody in this way, no matter who it is. Because we close down. We get in a hurry, and then that becomes the habit. That becomes the way we move in the world, doing tasks.
Getting stuff.
And you've got tears in your eyes. So it's my experience for me in my life. When my heart opens, there's liquid manifestation that comes out of my eyes. When I'm happy or sad. So when I go to help with the home funeral, there's tears because my heart is wide open. It's like I'm cracking it open And the more I open it, it can't close up again. It's like exercising your muscles, you know? And so we're exercising this muscle to open, this heart to open. And then when you come into a situation like this, it opens to the extent that it can open. You know, and it keeps opening. It just keeps blossoming and opening and opening. And so then you have the capacity to move through the world with this heart that is open. But we have to exercise it. We have to trust it. We have to trust that it's going to be okay and that we have the capacity to take care of it. So then if something labeled bad happens, I don't have to close my heart. I can still hold it open and know that it's going to be okay. Because with that open heart, wisdom is going to be there. The wisdom's going to tell me what to do instead of fear or anxiety or a shut down nature. I'd rather have wisdom tell me what to do than operate out of fear to tell me what to do.
So it's not that you're impermeable to being hurt or that your open heart couldn't be transgressed by someone, but it's that you can allow that pain to be a lesson.
Absolutely. So I still experience anger. I experience those emotions. But when it flashes, when it arises, I have the ability to pause before I react to it. Because if I'm having anger or irritation, it's my own mind that's doing it. I'm going to want to blame it on something outside of me because it's not a comfortable sensation. I'll want to blame it on something somebody said or their behavior or whatever it is. And if I can wait to see where in me it's coming from without trying to push it away, then there's an opportunity to heal it. So there's a saying in Buddhism, I don't know if I'm going to get it all right. The thought manifests the word manifests the deed manifests the behavior becomes the habit. So if I can control my thoughts, the anger, say, because somebody said something I didn't like, because they're trying to control me. You know, I'll tell a story about it. So then I'll go, okay, so just like what they're doing, they're nervous, they're concerned about something, they're fearful about something, I too am that, so I'm projecting onto them and I'm angry because I behave just like they behave. That's my habit. That's why I'm reacting to it. Because you could, if I don't have that habit and you do it, I don't even see it. It doesn't bother me because I don't also have that habit. You see? So it's something in me that I can heal. I still have this to work on. Thank you for showing this to me. This is, there it is, right there in front of me. And it's unskillful. So, to be able to stop, not react immediately, because we act pretty immediately, then I have the opportunity to change the story. I don't want to behave that way. You know, somebody just said something. It really doesn't have anything to do with me, but it's all about me. So it takes diligence, it takes being mindful, and sometimes I'm unskillful. A lot of times I'm unskillful because I'm tired, I'm hungry, I'm whatever. And so, and I give myself a break. You know, I'm in a human body.
In your understanding, or in the Buddhist tradition, if we get more and more skillful at that, does that mean we no longer have to take form to learn the lessons of life, basically?
That's a good question. When we can have the capacity to see everything through love and compassion, all of our behaviors are exhibited through love and compassion. We have the opportunity to wake up. It doesn't mean that an awake person doesn't still have the thoughts arise, the emotions arise. They're just skillful at how to deal with them. But yes, when one finally understands the transient nature of all things and can come from compassion and love, there is the opportunity to transcend the need to take on another body. That's my goal.
Yeah?
Yes.
Where will you be if you're no longer
Well,
in the cycle?
I don't know that I want to talk about that in this interview. I think that it's too big of a topic, and I don't know how to speak about it eloquently. So one of the things in my practice is that if I don't know something, I need to say it.
Yeah.
So I'm not skillful enough to talk about this topic.
Okay. Yeah. I appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. I like to think about it in my own life, I think, because I ask myself the question a lot of, did I choose this experience? Did I choose to come be Mara born in 1988 in Portland, Oregon? Because that helps me have a gratitude lens for whatever happens, to be like, like you were saying, to look for whatever the lesson is, to be like, I'm having a hard time with this mom that I came here with. Well, why did I choose to come here with this parent? So
I will talk about that part.
Okay.
So in the death Bardo, when we're traveling in the Bardo, we've died. We're now on this journey to either wake up or to take on another body. And when we get it takes about 52 to 49 days. The first 3 days is a transition period, then for 49 days we're traveling to take on another body. And one could read about that in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And during that time, there's 6 realms of existence. So depending on what our karma and conditioning is, we're looking for a certain setting to take form. So the human form is considered the best form if we're going to take a body, because we've got just the right amount of suffering and just the right amount of free will to make choices in our life to better our situation. In the other realms of existence, it's hard to better your situation, but in a human form, it's easier. And so what we do is we pick our parents. You pick your mother and father, and to help us to undo our karma, okay? Or our karma and conditionings is choosing them based on some kind of craving. So even in the death Bardo, to be present to what is happening and to make choices, make the right choice. Mm-hmm. But it's hard to make choices because there's no physical body to ground us. We're just mind and conditioning traveling and karma traveling. So our parents, whether they are skillful or not skillful, we've chosen them. It's not good or bad. It's just what is.
Thank you. Yeah.
Because we had to have a womb to be born as a human, and there had to be a sperm. So...
And the more I live too, the more I see that everyone has some version of work to do with that exact situation. Yeah. So I'm certainly not unique in it.
Yeah. When one thinks about, if you're Buddhist and you have an altar, you put your parents on the altar because they provided you this human birth.
Yeah, that's pretty much the most fundamental gratitude prayer there is, I guess. Yeah.
You're also supposed to put your... the president of your country on your altar. It's a tough one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because we happen to live in a country that is safe,
What do you mean?
Well, we were lucky enough to be born in the United States, where we have the safety to practice whatever spiritual practice we want. For the most part, it doesn't seem so now, does it? But so, even the region where you were born, we're not living in a country that has war going on within the country. I mean, we do in the United States. There's this weird hate going on. We have a physical body that is free from defects that would keep us from bettering our situation. So there's great gratitude that we have the capacity to make choices. We're not starving. We have a livelihood that helps us to pay for things. Even those simple things, there's gratitude for that. In the entire world, we might be in the minority in that we have this freedom and free will.
Well, it seems like a shame to wait until death to try to do this kind of work. Would you have any suggestions for people of where to start on the path of becoming responsible for their death?
doing advanced care directives, a living will and a healthcare power of attorney, and thinking about where, how you want your body to be disposed of. I mean, we go on a big trip, and we take the trash out, and we take out the recycling, and we have somebody come water our plants and feed our pets. So we're going to go on a big trip, a permanent one. So make a plan, and don't be afraid to talk about it. You know, if you have a loved one who's dying, talk to them about it. There's so many times family members don't want to talk to their loved one who's dying about their death, and they're missing out on a wonderful opportunity to heal things and stand in this grace of dying.
What happens at Carolina Memorial Sanctuary that's different, or what is the offering there?
So Carolina Memorial Sanctuary is the first conservation burial ground in North Carolina. There's only 9 in the country, and we use green burial practices where the graves are dug by hand. The graves are 3 feet deep instead of 6, so that our nutrients will actually benefit what's planted above. The earth is taken out in layers, so the root mass goes back on last, and sometimes in the summertime, within 3 or 4 weeks, there's plants growing out again. And family can participate in the process of the closing of the grave and carrying the loved one to the grave, lowering the body. There's a conservation easement on the property to protect it in perpetuity. This land that we have was in pretty bad shape, and so we're restoring the land, and the burials help to pay for that. And memorial gifting of trees and shrubs and things help to reforest it.
Wow. What was on it previously?
In its history, it was a dairy farm, and so it was pretty battered. And when plants then start to grow again after something like that, they're usually invasive plants and quick-growing things. And somebody had planted a lot of Bradford pear trees, which are very invasive on the property, so we had to hire a forestry crew initially to uncover the ground so that we could see what we had and to start restoring it.
I imagine our bodies are pretty juicy plant food.
They are, and so embalming isn't allowed either. So we don't allow any bodies that have been embalmed because those chemicals are so toxic. Other cemeteries would have to adhere to the guidelines around the protection of water through the number of feet from the water to be able to bury a body. And in conventional burial grounds, there's also the metals of the caskets. There's usually a grave liner that's made out of concrete or metal. And it's a pretty toxic thing to be buried in the conventional burial practices. Plus, there's the herbicides and the fertilizers that are used to then grow grass right on top, and the mowing and all that kind of stuff. So, yes, formaldehyde is a carcinogen, and so it's even for funeral directors. There's higher rates of cancer from embalming fluids.
I was walking through a cemetery recently, and I was sort of so touched by, there's the little markers and then the big tombs, and just the idea that even in death we're trying to sort of sort ourselves, I guess, by class in a way. It's just like, that's so human.
It is. So at our burial ground, we try to use native stone that comes out of the ground there. So field stone, it's called field stone. And we keep the stones small. They're laying flat on the ground, so when you look across the landscape, you see nature. You're not seeing monuments. So that the park, it's a public, also a public park. So the park is the monument. The protection of the land is the monument.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing, and thank you for all the educating that you're doing.
You're welcome.
I didn't know until talking to you that this was possible, and so I'm really grateful you're spreading the word.
Yes, it's pretty interesting to, when I was married, we go to a party or something, and people are milling around, and they would ask what I do, and I'd start talking, and you could just see this panic in their eyes. They'd look around like, oh no, how do I get away from this person? So it's pretty funny.
Well, I imagine in 2019 that there must be a fair amount of people that are interested in doing things differently.
Well, there are now, but I basically don't socialize anymore. So that was 10 years ago. So
wow.
Yeah. I mean, there'd be a few people who'd be interested, but for the most part, it's like, oh my gosh, what have I got myself into?
Pioneer.
Renegade.
Well, thank you, Caroline.
You're welcome.
Thank you all so much for being here. I feel like with this podcast, I'm just getting the most incredible education. And sometimes I'm so gobsmacked by how much of the wisdom that people share with me is the same. It's the same fundamental understanding of who we really are and what we're here to do. But it comes through these different wisdom traditions that are just these beautiful manifestations of human creativity and how human consciousness interacts with the human experience and translates it into meaning. And I was really struck when Caroline was telling me about the tong-len breath from the Buddhist line, how much it reminded me of something that I learned about from the Shipibo, which is an indigenous tribe in Peru, who I met when I went to drink ayahuasca for the first time. And in Shipibo cosmology, everything in this plane of reality has a pattern that's specific to the jaguar, to the human, to the ayahuasca vine. And when there's trauma, there's a break in the pattern. So for example, if somebody's in ceremony because they're dealing with an abusive parent, the healer inside the medicine can see that break in the pattern, and what they're taught to do is to take that break inside of themselves, surround it with love, knit it back together, and send it back. And fundamentally, I feel like both of these practices are revealing this intense, creative, regenerative power of human beings. And by using our consciousness, we can purify and make new. And this tool is breath, space, it's listening. I feel that. I see how people who are suffering are just calling out for somebody to witness them, to witness their experience, and to just be with them in it, not try to change it or change them. So the hardest thing is, even when I have an instinct to want to fix people or fix their circumstances, they can feel that. They can feel my need for them to get better. And it just adds to the suffering. So what I'm learning in my life is that presence, that just being with people, that just bearing witness, I think that is love. And man, that's humbling. It makes me want to hold myself to that standard in this lifetime. I mean, what else are we doing here? Timothy Leary co-authored a book with Ram Dass and Ralph Metzner in 1964 called The Psychedelic Experience, which is a manual for anyone that wants to undertake a psychedelic experience, and it's based on the bardos that are laid out in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And I found that to be a really sweet text to check in with sometimes. As a solo psychonaut and as a trip sitter, I want to read an excerpt from that book to take us out. I think it's a great articulation of how psychedelic experiences can be worthwhile keyholes into the kind of consciousness that Caroline is embodying through her Buddhist practices. And I know in my life, the psychedelic experiences where I could embody those qualities in a direct experiential way gave me a point of reference back in my life that transcended the containers of the psychedelic experience. The fact of the matter is that all apparent forms of matter and body are momentary clusters of energy. We are little more than flickers on a multidimensional television screen. This realization, directly experienced, can be delightful. You suddenly wake up from the delusion of separate form and hook on to the cosmic dance. a sense of profound oneness, a feeling of the unity of all energy, superficial differences of role, caste, status, sex, species, form, power, size, beauty, even the distinctions between inorganic and living energy disappear before the ecstatic union of all in one. All gestures, words, acts, and events are equivalent in value. All are manifestations of the one consciousness which pervades everything. You, I, and he are gone. My thoughts are ours. Your feelings are mine. Communication is unnecessary since complete communion exists.